start all over again.
Oh my God. It's not what I was counting on, gang. You got to help me out here. My lesson plan is being blown right before me. Anything? So everything about...
You started classes this last week, right?
We did. We're in our second week already.
How's it going?
You have to ask the graduates. From my perspective, it's going quite well. But I'm not sure what they would say.
Do you ever feel like my experience with teaching class groups online is there's no interaction. You can't hear people go, yeah, because everyone's on mute. So
I'm a pretty good reader of faces. So I can tell when you're sneering at me behind those glasses there.
Sorry, I'm thinking
No problem.
classes and like classes.
He's doing very well as a teacher, as a student in his lessons. He's doing quite well.
Thank you very much. That's a nice compliment.
That's very true. It's we were commenting today, those of us that take lessons from you, how you can pick up everything just as well through your camera in terms of your response to our gesture and our voice for our voice lessons, just as well as if we were in person.
You know, the only thing I found about the Zoom is that it just takes so freaking much concentration.
And energy.
It does.
It's like teaching in the room sometimes.
I just found out this week that Zoom has a speaker view that you can use instead of the grid view. And it's supposed to be much less fatiguing for a listener like myself.
Yeah, I'm looking at you individually right now. The problem is that if I don't have the gallery view while I'm teaching, I can't see how people are reacting and absorbing information.
Right.
And then I miss when their head hits the desk and they fall asleep. So there's that.
If just as on my end, things that are working really well, if any, I know a lot of us are going through that right now. Dual screens makes a humongous difference. I mean, a humongous difference. So does putting it on like a big screen as a screen. But also, I started this week just turning off my camera because I realized that like I don't look at myself in person most of the time.
Well, see, I have to look at myself to see how I react to my own jokes. You know, it's terribly important for me to.
I don't need that, and it's like an extra distraction.
I have to make sure the mic is covering my missing tooth. That's really important.
You could get like one of those a little what are they called? The spit guards. Why did I just blank on what they're called? A pop screen. And it'll cover half your face.
That's ordered. It just hasn't arrived yet.
You'll look like Mariah Carey though.
Oh, oops. It wasn't in my plan. So we kind of breeze through some of these topics. Are any of the parts of them interesting to you to review or revisit? I love all the names I'm seeing, but no pictures of people. Makes me assume you're naked.
Yeah, no, not so much.
I missed everything. If you want.
What's that, Mark?
I was working last week, so I missed the session, or 2 weeks ago. So you can review if you'd like.
Okay. I do think that I found, when I saved the recordings, they kind of went into a secret place in my computer, and I found them. I found a whole bunch of them, and so I'll review them tonight. And if there's any of that material I can send on to you, I will.
Don, I don't know if it's possible for you to share the one that was put in the 3 Summers program that you did on a ProArt, because that was really so much more in depth than what you were able to do with us here.
Okay, I'll add that in. That was my lecture. That
was probably the best presentation on the topic that I've heard you give. It was just so clear, and you had the time to do it. So.
Yeah. Well, when you get 2.5 hours versus 40 minutes, it does make a difference. Vicki, I keep expecting that bird behind you to speak or do something right now. All right. How is Miss Nancy? Dr. Holland?
I'm fine. I retired from my job.
You did.
What?
So you work hard, you get a doctorate, and then you quit your job. How's that work?
Well, I wasn't conducting and I wasn't rehearsing, and those are the skills I have. And I was doing Zoom services, which I'm not very skilled at.
So there you
So
go.
I'm allowing the Hollywood sound engineers to put together the Zoom services. They're much more skilled at it than I
And they
am.
look very good too, by the way.
Have you seen some of ours?
Yeah, I watched one the other day you put out. Very good.
They are amazing. Yeah, we've got these Emmy award-winning sound engineers who
Wow.
slideshows together for any hint.
Incredible.
And they just pull recordings off of the archives. So there really wasn't much for me to do.
That's very, very nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything on the pro art? That was all perfectly understood. I got to do this quickly. Charlie looks like he's going to sleep.
I always look like that.
Well, I wasn't going to say that, but
No, you don't.
Dawn, before you get rolling, just a little reminder, if Dawn starts to cut out on us, guys, rather than interrupt him or try to get his attention, let's just turn our cameras off because it tends to work really, really well.
yeah. That is true.
The only other thing I was going to say, Don, is that we didn't see the same session 2 weeks ago that the other guy missed.
Okay.
We could never get into the meeting. We saw the link too late and we couldn't get in by
Okay.
then, so.
So I'll look that all up and send that to you. The topics now have already been through the graduates, and those are 2.5-hour lectures. So I'm happy to share those with you if you want to get more depth and more material out of that. Anything on the conducting stuff? Who was it that said last week conducting? Oh, I think it was, who was that? Bothers me. I can't remember things all of a sudden. It was Herb. I think that he didn't know that conducting was so complicated. Right? So what did you gather conducting is about at the end of the day?
Well, just I had no idea how you had to think in the future the way you do. It just never dawned on me. I mean, it's logical, but that's like, wow, that it just makes a perception of what you have to go through quite different than what I.
Yeah, if you want to practice that, get a partner and start a round, and you start one beat ahead of everybody. There's a drill that I used to do in the classes of doing do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, or this way, do, re, mi. But when I'm doing do, and then I go to re, you start with do. Okay, and we do the same scale, but we're one beat apart. So I go do, then you go do. All right, here we go. I'll start. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. It's hard, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's like.
But that's what my mind is doing.
Wow.
I am staying one beat ahead of you all the time. Sometimes two, okay, but most often one. Ever so often, the texture of the music allows me to go a couple of measures ahead and shape something in a bigger formal design. And that's kind of fun. And if you don't quite catch me, then I have to go back and catch you. So, you know, in terms of our present day condition, this is a form of communication, isn't it? Well, that got a deafening silence.
We're all on mute.
I understand. But thank you for the shaking heads. I like that. So you would think, well, for instance, one of the things a lot of conducting teachers tell their students do is stand in front of a mirror and conduct. And I ask my students not to do that. And the question is, why? Yes, Miss TC for 10 points.
Because then you're watching yourself like a performance, and conducting isn't a performance. And then you're also reacting to what you're seeing, which makes you late.
Yeah, several levels
You're
of
going
it.
for a look when you look in the mirror.
That's right. You're evaluating your look, and conducting is not evaluation. So the question often gets asked, how can I be conducting and not, in a certain sense, just listening to you in the moment, but actually I'm listening to my own head project the sound ahead? And I describe it this way. It's like an overhead projector transparency. The music that I know on my head is a transparency. And then when I conduct that, I hear your reaction to that, and I can hear the anomalies. And so I want to kind of straighten all those things out so that we're in perfect alignment. So it's like having two transparencies, one or two beats after the fact. And you're trying to get them to come together. And so the rehearsal technique is about, what do I pick out of the anomalies that I hear? Yes?
Yeah.
Who's saying hello? Who's saying hello?
Please mute.
The anomalies that you hear are become your rehearsal points, but then that brings in a whole nother level. What do you allow to annoy you enough that you have to stop and fix it right then? And what can you allow to go through and just pass through so that you have the opportunity to rehearse things? And I use that word carefully because I don't call what we do practice, I call it rehearsal. And what is rehearsal? A non-graduate student or someone without their doctorate in music. Anybody? Susan, you got something? No?
Must have something to do with re and hear.
Yes, it does. In fact, Leif, that's exactly right. It's the ability or the permission to rehear something and give it another go. And who do we observe that does this almost perfectly? Not necessarily in the listening category, but in the activity category. We watch children play, and they will constantly redo something. And we as adults want to leap in and say, yeah, but if you do it this way, I'll be so much better. But in fact, we let them play for a while until they discover the more efficient or the better way to do it. And one of the first things most children will do is they'll stack something, right? And it doesn't matter whether it's the stuffed toy or the block or whatever, everything is possible in the pile. They don't have any restriction on what they can put into the pile. And the resistance you have to have as an adult is not to leap in too soon until they figure out that the teddy bear doesn't support the block as well as you think, and that it's likely to fall. And I think a choral rehearsal is very much like that. If you all actively participate in terms of wanting to make a difference and or wanting to make it better, then you're constantly assessing while you're in the process of what did I personally contribute to that, and what is the goal of the whole? What are we all trying to do? And the best groups, and usually they're professional, know how to do that assessment quickly. And notice I use the word assessment and not the word judgment, because judgment's what gets in the head of most amateurs, particularly when we hear ourselves by ourselves. We get very aware that maybe we're not as in tune as we thought, or our tone is not as incredibly beautiful as we thought, or we do a lot of negative assessment. And there's no way in this art to progress or to move forward if what you say to yourself was, well, that's just not good. You have to, in fact, say what's good about it, and then how can I make it match the intention of what we want to make it better. And a certain cell, yeah, go ahead.
One of the things that I'm thinking about is that there are a lot of people who, like me, need to learn by doing. They need to learn by making the mistake.
Absolutely.
And there's not a lot of way that you can short circuit that for them by telling stuff in advance.
And that's one of the great things that you at JPL have taught me, is that you enjoy the repetition because you enjoy the process of experiencing it again until that point where you feel comfortable in knowing it. When I first started JPL, I was a little impatient that we just move forward. And you were saying back to me, well, but we don't really know it. And we're not willing to move forward until we really know it. And I think that what makes engineers and scientists and accountants really amazing is that they have an endless capacity to repeat until it gets right. And you just keep doing. Some of it's trial and error, but some of it becomes practice. In other words, rehearsal is not practice, but rehearsal becomes practice. And practice is the ability to do something over again in repetition and repeat the event. So when you go to a surgeon, you don't go to a surgical rehearsal, you go to a surgical practice. And when you go to a lawyer, you don't go to a lawyer rehearsal, you go to a law practice, because they know their work so well that they're able to do it again. The problem with practice is what? We start to get a belief that we know what we're doing, and we don't get open to other possibilities. So in my practice of saying, oh, they only need 2 or 3 times to it, I had to relearn, in fact, 10 times isn't bad. There's not a bad thing to it. And what I try to add to the context is maybe some humor or some self-deprecating reflection on how we're doing it so that the pace keeps going and we don't get bored with what we're doing. But I can remember the young lady that sat behind me in math class, algebra class, as a matter of fact. She always had the right answers, but I realized that during the lecture, while I was trying to keep from sleeping, she was constantly redoing the formulas until she got it right. So she always got the right question, and I had no clue where I was. I was lost. Yeah, Charlie?
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to say is that when I sing in a chorus, there are a lot of things going on around me. I am integrating a lot of different sources of input. And what the conductor is doing is a guideline among this cacophony of other inputs from people around me, from the piano in the back. I'm trying to listen, stay tuned with that, and listen to the sopranos come in, what's my role in the chord, and all of those things. There's a hell of a lot going on that's part of my experience, and I'm not dissecting and atomizing that experience. What I'm trying to do when I listen to your direction at the end of a phrase is integrate your new information with the experience that I just had. What should be different about that experience? And so that changes the way that I respond to the environment that I'm sitting in.
Absolutely true. And it's almost always shocking when you step out of the environment that you're in and you go to the front and you sit where I sit, you find out that what you're hearing as cacophony around you isn't necessarily happening out here. And so you have to trust the conductor is hearing as the whole. And even though you might hear your neighbor sing a wrong pitch, or you might hear something go on, what happens from the conductor point of view is that when things aren't quite right, there's fuzziness, or there's a feeling of that the music is not organically producing itself. And so that's always my clue that there's things going around some of you that is not accuracy. And, you're often willing to let me know at break or at the end of rehearsal. Certainly when I taught at PCC, there was no lack of people wanting to come into my office and tell me, do you know XX is missing all their notes and blah, blah, blah. And my response was always the same. Well, what are you going to do about it? They wanted me to do something about it. And I said, well, what are you going to do about it? If you know the part so well, drag that young person down to the practice room and spend some time with them, was my response to that. In other words, we all have a responsibility within the community to make it better. So we have to acknowledge what we're doing and how we're doing it. And then we have to acknowledge how our neighbors are doing it and find a friendly, happy way to get everybody involved. That's the ideal. It doesn't exactly exist in reality all the time, but I think that we have to understand that perfection where we sit is not necessarily destroy or aid what's happening out front, what the audience receives. It's difficult to listen to oneself, which is leading me to what we're going to talk a little bit about here in a minute, because we are going to necessarily negatively evaluate it on some level. And what's the primary reason for that? You would have gotten that out of my pro art lecture. What's the primary reason we're so negative about it? Bueller? Bueller. I see someone talking, but no.
Are you asking why we're negative about what we hear when we listen back to ourselves?
Yes.
Well, because, and I think what you said is because what we hear on the recording is not what we hear in our heads, because we have all these filters going on in our head. And so what we hear coming out of the recording is very different than what we're accustomed to hearing.
That's
but
right.
But it is accurate.
Yeah, what you're hearing on the recording is accurate. It is how we hear you, considering that it is a good mic situation and that the fidelity of the equipment is good. But for most of us, we sound a little bit tinnier, a little bit higher in pitch, a little more shrill, not as accurate in pitch as we thought. And all those would be true. Because to get back to Charlie's notion is that if we are listening inside of an ensemble and gathering all this information, what's the one thing we are not doing when we do that? And I know that choral folks and instrumental folks tell us all the time, listen, listen, listen. But in fact, what should we be really doing?
Hearing.
No. We should be audiating. And audiating means that you, with your reading of the material, are predicting what's happening next. And you can compare it very quickly to what's going on around you. But the epiphany for me came when I'd been on tour with Roger Wagner. I came back and then went up and sang for Helmut Rilling as a soloist. And so I was having all this very amazing experience working with professional singers. And when I got back, I applied for the program at SC and ended up at SC, and I auditioned for the chamber singers. And when I was sitting in the chamber singers, I realized it wasn't quite the level of professionals I had been working with in the last 3 months. And I kept trying to adjust my voice to match what was going on around me. Particularly, I had an alto on my left side and had a soprano on my right side. And in an instant, I decided, I'm not going to listen to them anymore. I'm just going to audiate the music as I know it needs to go, and I'm going to give that contribution to the conductor as they are conducting me, no more, no less. And what happened in that instant was really fascinating when I made that decision. The sounds on my right and left all of a sudden modified and started getting attracted into my field. So rather than me trying hard to hear myself over them and singing a little bit too loud and pushing them away, I actually started inviting them into my sound. And that's when my voice never fatigued again. I never got tired singing in a choral rehearsal because I was attracting sound. I was not trying to hear myself over the sound. And any of you have taught, or any of you have been in front lecturing, and you've got a room full of noise, my technique is never to talk over it. My technique is to wait for everybody to get quiet and then invite my voice into the environment, because I find trying to compete with a cacophony is just adding to the cacophony. I used to every year go down to San Diego and work in the district that was right next to Tijuana. And so there were a fair number of young ladies and gentlemen that came in from that region of the world into the classrooms. This is Sweetwater School District. I did this for like 12 years. And my job was to go around to every classroom and evaluate every teacher. And they had a reception the night before I was going to go out into the field, and someone pulled me aside and said, "Be careful when you go to," and I said, "Oh, don't tell me who that is. I don't want to know who that is. I don't want to be careful, and I don't want to be forewarned." Well, just to say that the class is a mess and they're out of control and they're probably going to get fired. So I'm walking onto the campus of this middle school, and I can actually hear kids yelling and cursing and carrying on. And as I got closer to the room where I was supposed to go, it was happening in that room. I mean, it was total chaos. And when I walked into the back of the room, the teacher pointed to the blackboard. Yes, it was still a blackboard. And in big letters, colored letters, it said, "Sit down, be quiet." I mean, the letters were this tall, right? Which is like screaming in chalk. And I looked at it and went, why is she screaming at them with a chalkboard? And I soon found out that the kids had just taken control of the classroom. And I stood up in front and I waited. I bet I waited a good 4 or 5 minutes before they caught on that I wasn't going to do anything until they shut up. And they did. And I said, thank you for the quiet. And I went on with session, and it turned out to be fairly productive. You know, I had a few resistors along the way, but as I taught the lesson, I erased the board. And I finally said, you know, when we make music, this is what we have to have is a blank slate. It can't start with all the noise and all the instruction and all that you have to do this. You have to start blank. And then we put sound inside, and the magic only happens if it's only the sound that exists within the frame, not our behavior, not our, you know, all the things. And the teacher thanked me, and they fired her 2 weeks later, and it was kind of sad. But and I haven't kept track of what happened to that teacher. But it's interesting that the very first classroom I walked into in my elementary school teaching with LA District in 1972 was the same kind of classroom. Loud, noisy, profane. Principal comes by and says, sorry, we have no control of this classroom. We're probably going to move the teacher, but do what you can do. And I used the same technique intuitively. I just said, I'm not going to play the game of who's noisiest. I'm going to be quiet until they want to. And then I just started quietly in a very soft voice singing a song, and they eventually joined in with me. The very next classroom I went to, I wrote about on Facebook last week, and they were already singing and already ready for me, and they had beautiful voices. I mean, terrific voices. Totally on pitch and very beautiful. And I said, can I join you? And of course, everybody said, sure. And as I joined them with my voice, all of a sudden, the beauty of the sound got just wickedly bad, and pitches were starting to be missed, and people were wandering around. And I wondered, what the heck just happened? And I realized that my voice was an octave below, and because they had good hearing, they were searching for me. They were trying to find my pitch, which was an octave too low. So I stopped them and I said, could we try this again? And would you mind if I use my Mickey Mouse voice? So instead of singing, dee 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 dee, I went, dee 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 dee, and all of a sudden everybody was in pitch and everybody was in tune. And I went, well, there's a lesson. Isn't that a pretty good lesson to get your first day of teaching is those two things? The noise was because they'd allowed it, and the lack of pitch accuracy is because I let it. Kind of important. In my observation teaching, I taught at 42nd Avenue or 42nd Street School in Watts. And the children there were so beautifully behaved. I was the only white person within a mile at that point on the campus. And I had my blazer on and my USC tie and my white shirt and my khaki pants and my wingtips and all the equipment. This is going back to 1972. And I walked into the classroom, and the lesson for the day was to teach the young people that notes go up and notes go down. And the reason they were doing that is because in the LA District in those years, they prepared every student in a 6-week lesson set about aspects of melody and aspects of harmony and aspects of rhythm, aspects of form. And then they took every single student in the district to go see the Magic Flute with the visiting New York City Opera, because we didn't have an opera in LA. And they usually held it at the Shrine so they could put, 6,000 people in there at a time. And every student sat through a full opera. And we're talking first graders through high schoolers. And everybody had lessons in those days on the elements of the Magic Flute, of which the key to the Magic Flute is there's the magic notes, right? And so my lesson plan, my card said, you have to teach the students that the notes go up and the notes go down. So I first do it with my voice, and I said, how many of you notice that the notes go up? No hands. So being kind of a trained communicator at that point already, I realized that if I raised my hand, they might raise their hand. So I said, how many of you notice that the notes go up? And about half the hands kind of went, half-heartedly up, and the honest ones kept their hands in their lap. And then I saw a piano, and I thought, oh, this is cool. I can use the piano because they'll clearly see that the notes go up. So I had, come on, let's go over to the piano. And we all go to the piano. And I play the sequence. Let's see if my piano will turn on. Come on, piano. You all hear that? And I play that. And I say, can you all see that the notes are going up? And I turned around, and this one beautiful boy with just the most beautiful eyes looking at me and glistening says, "Mister, those notes don't go up, they go to the right." And I went, "Oh, damn, I didn't know that." And I finished my lesson. I went home and I literally cried on the couch because here's a young man with no, in all innocence, just noticed really what was going on, not my sophisticated USC education, which was to tell them that what's going to the right is really going up. And he was right, of course. And so was I in a certain way, but there had needed to be other intermediary lessons to get the young people to know that pitches go up and pitches go down. And because that's a theme throughout the opera, it held their attention that in every act they were looking for that sequence. And I'm sure they thought, ooh, those notes just went up. And that the down function of the notes had a different meaning in Mozart's eyes. So we got through the lessons and I survived it. But it was sure humiliating and humbling, all those experiences. Great experiences to have a 22-year-old to kind of figure out how this actually all works and that you can't assume that it works the same for everybody. Any of you familiar with Eloise Ristad, R-I-S-T-A-D, Ristad's book on the soprano on her head? The soprano on her head. She was, yeah, you know that book?
Yes, I had to read it undergrad. Great book.
Yeah, it's a great book. But it kind of destroys some of our assumptions about how people perceive how things are going on. I'm pretty careful not to ask audiences what they perceived because I'm about to get information I don't really want to hear most of the time. Because a lot of our current audiences get things kind of in the visual manner, not through the auditory process. So I tend to want to get out of the room and let it be whatever it's going to be, and then wait for the email at some point.
Actually, Don,
Yeah.
is there a reason why we think one direction is up and one direction is down in notes?
The faster the frequency tends, because of the visualization of the musical score itself, tends to give us that we're going up. The fact is, to a non-trained musician, it's not up or down. It's simply
filters that refer to it as things other than up and down, to your knowledge?
not to my awareness. Again, I don't think people who learn the tradition by rote are necessarily interested in up and down. They're more interested in the color and the character of a sound, and not so much what it visually looks like. But for readers, there's another. Let me just take a left turn here. I've directed 43 musicals, and I got my training at the University of Redlands, where I took theater that year and took it from a very fine director by the name of Dr. Johnson. He was really incredible. But what was incredible about Dr. Johnson, and I didn't know it until I walked on stage for the first time. I walked on stage, he says, "Don't lead with your right, lead with your left." And I went, "Oh, okay." And then someone told me, "Do you know he's blind?" And I said, "What?" "Yeah, he's blind. He can hear the difference of your left foot moving and your right foot moving." And I went, "Ooh, that's a little scary." And he could also hear, by the way you projected your voice, what angle you were facing in the room and how you were gesticulating. He could actually visualize all that, even though he was totally blind. But he gave me some great instruction. And so, because I've only worked in the Western theater world, I realized that much of our perception of what we see theatrically is exactly how we read. So for us in the Western world, we start at the left edge of the page and we read across the page. But what if you're Japanese? Or you're reading in Israel? The direction is totally different. So our constant rehearsal of that visualization, that is, if I see something going from the left of my body to the right of my body, is fairly passive because it's ordinary. But if I see an object moving from my right to my left, it becomes rather extraordinary. Does that make sense to you? So I use that in my conducting, by the way. Is that when I want to emphasize something, I put it in the order of left to right so that it's going crossways from the way you're reading. And it puts more emphasis and power behind it. So that's true on stage. If I want to create passive passive acting movement. That is, I want people to disappear. I move them from stage right to stage left while I have a main character or maybe a couple of characters move from stage left to stage right. And everybody in the room will watch what happens to stage left to stage right and ignore everything that's going on from stage right to left. And so all of a sudden you see an empty stage and you wonder, where did everybody go? They disappeared because you didn't notice. And the same is true if you move someone from right to upstage left. That really puts them in disappearing. But if you want to make a very strong entrance, you want the king to enter, then move them from upstage left to downstage center, and all of a sudden that becomes very powerful. I heard a question.
Yes, Don.
Mm-hmm.
Do non-Western music, do they use the expression up and down the same way we do?
I have no idea.
Okay, thanks.
I know they use inflection in terms of gravity the same way. Every language has an up and every language has a down, right?
Yes,
so that's true, but that doesn't necessarily relate to notation. And there are lots of notation systems in the world. The Western being so prevalent basically imposes on everybody the left to right. It's really interesting. Do you know what most composers are working on right now in this COVID-19 era? It's really fascinating to watch them work. They've stopped notating music and they've started doing aleatoric music, chance music, because you could do it online with no problem with latency, because it's made up and it's not in time, it's of time. And so a lot of the composers right now are working on aleatoric structures rather than written out structures. And drones work amazingly well in this environment, because the fixed drone allows you to improvise over it, but without the change. The problem is if we start singing chords, the latency will start to cause us to wander, both because we're listening backwards and both because we're trying to predict what's happening forward. So that's why the virtual choirs are an individual contribution than engineered. It's an engineered thing, but the aleatoric choral presentations can be very generously made in the moment.
So
really
Philip Glass music would be a good thing to do.
Well, if you want to do 433, it's fine with me. I find it boring myself.
That's Cage.
Oh, sorry. Who did you say? Oh, John Adams. You mean
No, I said Philip Glass.
Oh, that stuff. Yeah, I don't quite get into it as much as some do, but.
Don, is the word you're using aleatoric?
Yes.
I don't know that word.
Also referred to as chance music. This was really prevalent in the 1970s when I was going to college, and we did dozens of these pieces in every concert.
And you're saying chance, like it's luck, not chant.
No, it's chance, like luck, like made up in the moment. I know pieces where they rolled dice and made decisions based on the roll of the dice.
So it's
I know
a form of new music, like avant-garde new music.
Well, it was avant-garde. It was avant-garde in the 40s. It's not avant-garde anymore. It's more of a manner thing. What, Jenny?
I was just saying, it's like taking like a line of music or a snip of a piece of music, and you all sing it at your own time, and there's no lining anything up. So everybody's just singing the same thing and swirling around like, yeah.
It's like the Hogwarts school song.
Okay.
Everybody sings their own tempo.
That would be unfortunately foreign to me because I've not followed that whole phenomenon. Sad to say. If I go to Universal Theater, I'll be just as amazed as a newborn child. I guess it means nothing to me.
About the
go ahead.
tempo, the rhythm thing. I was working on a song this week, and I just felt like constrained that I had to do things on beat. I feel like it was keeping the song from being everything that it could be. Is that a whole school of thought why do we need a steady beat for this particular piece?
Well, have you ever taken a friend that's not particularly musical to a classical concert?
I don't remember.
You don't remember anybody? And what's their first reaction to it usually? That's boring. And why is it boring?
Because the steady beat's not there all the time?
Yeah, the steady beat's not there. They're looking for the beat, and the beat is their kind of entryway into how music works. And so if you take a non-trained musician, they're wanting to move their body to the beat. They want to tap their foot. It's kind of the first thing we like to do. And even children, you see, when they move, they're trying to move to the beat, even though their gestures might be large and somewhat crude, they're still trying to internalize the beating of time. It's a more sophisticated act to take the time out of the music per se and put yourself in what one author calls gestural time. In other words, it's the gesture of the notes and the gesture of the words that you're putting together rather than the regulation of metrical time. We do have non-regulated time in music, and it was very, very popular in the Baroque period. And what do we call it? Hello? I'm getting crickets over here.
I forgot. I probably.
It's called recitative.
Okay.
It's basically speaking on pitch out of time. And almost all recitative falls in the category of narrative, of storytelling, because we don't tend to tell our story in a regular kind of time, because if we do, it starts to drive us nuts. It's in fact the irregular character of the language that we become passionate about when we're listening to speech. But go back to the original Greeks gathering together in choruses, and what do they call it? Choric song, right? And choric song was basically a unison narrative telling a story on a given pitch. Maybe with inflections, I don't know. I don't have any recordings of it, sadly, but there is some notion that you have a Gogic accent, that there's the accent of the word. But if I regulate my sound to the sound of a pattern that becomes a meter, I damn well better have a really good melody. Because without the melody and a moving and interesting harmony, that just becomes repetitive. Your brain just goes numb. It's kind of like being held inside for 100 days.
Yeah, I just felt like the emotion.
It'll drive you nuts.
Was a song I wrote, and I felt like the emotion of the song was being like constricted because I had to conform to this beat, you know.
Well, isn't that the nature of poetry? Doesn't poetry, in a certain sense, have a certain unlicensed meter that it develops? I mean, in the older poetry, there was actually a very recognizable meter, especially in American poetry. One of the heartbeats of American poetry was what pattern?
Ionic pentameter.
Well, that's iambic pentameter, and that's Shakespeare and British for sure. But what about this pattern? Isn't that a pattern you recognize?
Limericks.
Yeah, limericks are exactly like that. And in fact, the humor is in the limerick, because the limerick gets its humor from da 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 da. It's at that moment of the intersection of the, doing the final where the humor exists in every limerick. But it exists in the American culture because of our folk music nature, because it matched the language. And the folk tune that matches the American kind of common language we have from east to west is the farmer in the dell. So if you would do this, take your finger and go, what? What? See, I can see who's asleep. What? Again, everybody take your finger and go, what? So when I do that with my finger, you say what? The farmer in the dell, the farmer in the dell. Hi-ho, the dairy-o, the farmer in the dell. Well, how many of you sat in elementary classes and felt the teacher, as they were lecturing, was always asking you questions that you couldn't answer? Remember that feeling? Yeah. So I thought about it one day, and I realized that the American speech pattern, the way we speak, is always asking a question that doesn't necessarily have an answer. It's a rhetorical approach. So listen to my speech again, and listen to the pattern of my tones, and you'll notice that they follow the farmer in the dell very well. And there's a what at the end of each one of those statements, of which you get your mind going, what's he asking for? What's he want? I'm not sure what he wants, all right? And so the rhetorical nature of the English language in America is the farmer in the dell. Which is why if you go to a culture and you want to learn their language or learn how they use their language in inflection and rhythm, then study their folk music. So let's go back and look at some of the great composers and what did they intuit right away? Study the folk music. Did Brahms study the folk music? Absolutely. He studied all the gypsy music that was around him and the way the gypsies talked. And he actually composed pieces that were built around those rhythms. The gypsy songs and the Liebeslieder waltzers were all part of that process. And we have Bartok, and we have Holst, and we have Vaughan Williams, these great composers who collected the countryside and brought it into their music, but also preserved it starting in the early part of the 19th century, actually were able to preserve it in recording. What they did is actually notate it. And so they actually wrote some of those things out. And that's an area of worthy study because it teaches you how people actually speak a language. A friend of mine works with immigrants from countries like Japan and China, and the parents are in the corporate world, and so they put their children in daycare, and he visits the daycare to teach them English, but he teaches them English by teaching them folk songs. So what happens with the young people when they come out of the folk song tradition is their inflection is correct and their way that they accent the speech is correct. And so they don't sound like they have a foreign accent anymore because they've changed their approach to language. Wow. To the American approach. It's interesting when Kodai got very famous in America and all these American teachers went over to study with him, they all brought back his music, but they made a fatal mistake. They used his rhythms and not our rhythms. So the farmer in the dell stopped being the farmer in the dell, the farm to the farmer in the dell, the farmer in the dell, hi-ho the dairy-o, the farmer, and that's not English. And when Kodai was asked about near the end of his life by the people who invented the philosophy of education through music, which is adopted in the LA school district, he said, why are you doing that? Use the rhythm of your own language. Don't use the rhythm of mine. It's kind of revelatory when you think about that. Okay, so the purpose of our gathering. Everybody having a good time? I have to finish this before I finish my drink because I'm not willing to get up and go get another one. I would like to do a virtual recording. I now have some recording equipment here. I'm going to have some help from Francesca of why my mic is popping so much. I don't think it's just that I don't have a shield. I think there's something within my system that's causing that. And because people have been talking to me about it. But I've got all the equipment here. I'm in my little studio up here in the mountains, and I've got the software ready to go. So I would like us to concentrate on 2 songs. One comes from the JPL library. It's been kind of a little anthem of farewell, and I think it's the sentiment of it is very lovely. Stars and Faces, right? Stars, Songs, and Faces. DBS, I think that's in our Facebook page, so you might want to look it up. I know everybody in JPL has it, but I'd like to start with that. So that means, Nancy, I need to have a recording of the piano part, okay? And I will be reaching out to a accompanist this week to do "Oh Love," and I've also written to David Lockington to see if he'd be willing to contribute the cello solo, and this will go up on the Pasadena Symphony website.
Don, do you want
Stars, Songs, and Faces is on the DBS.
It's on the Facebook page.
Perfect.
And I
Thank you, Charlie.
put it into a set of links that I posted for the concert that we almost did.
Right, and I think you put the changes in, right?
Yes.
All right, thank you so much for that. Nancy?
Do you want a video or an audio recording?
I'm going to suggest that we just do audio.
Okay.
And that I will do various scenes and pictures so that no one's intimidated by the visual thing about it. And I'm not going to particularly identify people by anything but your first name throughout. So no one will actually know that how you are specifically sounding. So this, I want to take the intimidation out of this. But as soon as you get to the recording to me, Nancy, then I will conduct it so that you all have a guide to go with and you can sing it. And then I will reconcile it through the software that I've got. It doesn't have to be perfect, just be sincere. Susan, did you have a question?
Yeah, I couldn't find my Music of O Love, so I looked on the DBS site and I don't see it in there.
Okay, that's because we all had copies.
We borrowed my copies from the church.
Okay, I thought there was probably some logical reason.
I will see if I have a copy at home, and if I do, I'll.
I actually, through permission of the composer, have the PDF of that.
Oh, that's
So-
right. You did it for your book. Okay.
I did it for my book, and I'm sure she'd agree to do it for this project. So I have the PDF of that, and I'll put it up online for you all. I'll get to that tomorrow morning because I
So-
plan on sitting on the couch and watching TV and having one more drink tonight.
So there's not going to be any video of us in this video. It's going to be. Just
I would like to
ourselves.
do a screen capture of you as a montage, and I'll roll those through, but I'm not going to do the typical virtual choir. Everybody's face is showing immediately. There's I think more artistic ways we can do that doesn't look like the typical virtual choir. Okay. So in the next week or two, we'll start recording these things. Next Tuesday, we'll do a little practice session so that you're all sure of how I want to move, tempo a certain way and phrases and all that. And we'll do kind of a little practice. I'll be singing and I'll be doing phrases and I'll be conducting, and you'll have your mic off and you'll be contributing your amazing voice to that. Right? My whole goal in life is to see people smile. That's my whole thing, right?
John, do you care how we record this? Just whatever, best we can do?
You can put it on a voice memo if you wish, or you can, I think for some of you to be able to see the music and to put it on your computer so that you're hearing through headset the piano parts, right? And then take your smartphone and sing into the smartphone. That'll create an MP3, or I think it creates an MP4 file, and I'll convert it to MP3 and then reconvert it to the MP4 when we do the movie part. It'll have a similar feel to the ones that I've done at the holiday time when I put those up online for you guys, where I've taken works that we've done in the past and I do pretty pictures and that kind of stuff. Inspiring stuff.
So I don't have to find a blank wall somewhere in my house anymore.
No, not at all. I want to take that complication out of it. The production value isn't into, do you have the San Francisco Bay Bridge behind you? Or
my computers are too old to even put a background.
well, there you go.
Zoom, so
Well, we better start a GoFundMe page for you then.
I love my computer. It's just
Okay. So we'll try to wrap this up in the month of July. So next week we'll rehearse the two pieces together to get all the nuance. Then I'll give you a couple of weeks to get me up a voice memo recording of it, and I'll put I guess you could just do it through my email, and I'll collect them that way and upload them to my computer here. Make sense?
Don, I saw that we had some new friends.
We do.
Can we know who they are and introduce
I'm not sure
themselves?
they've all stayed with us.
Oh, okay.
I've got a second page here I haven't looked at. Hello. That's good to see Carol again. Jonathan, dinner's over, huh? Yeah. Okay, so open to all of us. I look forward to having this being kind of fun, and then it'll go on in August on the Pasadena Symphony page. In terms of what happens next year, I think you well know it's still open at this point, and I think it's a little bit too. The virus is a little bit too active to make a clear plan at this point. Try to stick to it. So my hope is that sometime in the October-November area, we'll be back to doing our work, and I hope that the symphony will allow us to sing again and do that kind of thing, but that's totally out of my hands. But we'll do our best. I don't know, Dave, at the Adventist Church, whether you guys are planning on even on your holiday program, are you?
Sorry, I needed to unmute. We are not planning to do the holiday program at the church.
Okay. Thank you for that update.
We're not even going to be back in church until September,
Yeah, makes sense.
at least.
Yeah. Well, I've isolated myself up in the mountains. The air is beautiful. You're welcome to come and sit out on my deck if you wish to do so. And when you come inside, I'll go outside. But if that gets you out of town and gets you feeling good about stuff, you're welcome to come up. Sunsets here are incredibly gorgeous. And the deck has been cool. It's going to get a little warm for 4th of July. And those fireworks shows that do happen below me will be seen from the deck. You can't even barely hear them, but I do get to see. Last year I saw 22 shows, I think, around the valley, because I could see everything from Moreno Valley to Riverside to Redlands to San Bernardino to Yucaipa. So I get to see a large variety of shows, and you're welcome to come put a beach chair and grab a nice cold beverage and stay for an hour and have some fun if you wish. Anything else for the good of the cause until I see you next week? You all got the updated Zoom, right? Well, you're clearly here, so you must have gotten it. So those have the next 4 meetings already on the Zoom. So make sure you save that email so that you can join us next week for our rehearsal. So
Question?
yeah.
So I saw there's that. I got the emailed link in here, and I saw that it listed what the next rehearsals are. But sometimes, like, Facebook doesn't put things in order for some reason, right? It sounds almost like I missed something else. Was there a message posted about the plan of the virtual choir stuff, or was it just what you mentioned right now?
Nope, it's just what I talked about. I was going to talk about it last week, but I got too busy in my own world. My equipment wasn't here, but now my equipment's here and I'm familiar with it and I'm ready to go. And I've got a piano that I can play in real time, and I can make noises and sounds and all that good stuff. That will be hooked up to my my processor here this next week when the cable arrives. So it'll be clear. And it turns out that when I conduct on this machinery, my beat and my time or sense of time is actually pretty much in sync. It's just a few milliseconds, not even a millisecond behind. So it'll allow us to have a more authentic performance. But remember that when you do your recording, I can tweak it to make it come out in time. I can make sure that we're, relatively in time together, and that will sound well together, okay? So don't worry about how perfect you are. All right? I am not going to put the auto tuner on. I'll take you as you are. So it'll just be the real live thing. Okay, my friends?
Remember, we need
Yes.
love music.
Yeah, I told you I'll post it tomorrow morning.
I'm just reminding because we've talked about other things in between.
Okay, my memory's pretty good about that.
Mine's not.
And I know you'll be yelling at me by noon if you don't have it, so there it is. No yelling?
Hey, Don,
okay, good.
how do we get
Yeah.
music if you're a JPLer not on Facebook?
Pardon?
How do you get the music if you're a JPLer not on Facebook?
Just send me an email and I'll email it back to you, okay? dlbrinegar@mac.com. Or you can let
Joanne and she can distribute it?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I'll post it to her so that she can post it to all of you, okay?
Awesome, thank you.
No, you bet. Anything else? Y'all look so good. Y'all look healthy. It's nice to see people without masks so I don't feel like I'm being robbed.
For those of you who haven't done any recordings before and you hadn't thought through it, be sure you need 2 devices, one to record to and one to watch the music from.
That's right. That's right. So an iPad and a computer are really helpful along with your smartphone or however you want to do that.
Are we going to be watching you conduct? Will there be a conducting video?
Yes, there is.
Fantastic.
I'll do my best. So Nancy's going to give me a recording of Stars, and I'll be reaching out to a friend of mine to do the Oh Love. Sure, great to see all of you.
Good to see you, Don.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let's wish JPL luck in their launch. Everybody watch. Mark, you or Charlie, you have some advice about where we'll go find the materials, or Leslie or Lincoln? Anybody? Carol? Some.
I'm sure it'll hit the news pretty well at the end of July. It's not going to launch before July 30th.
All right, so somewhere in the mid-July. I'm a real fan of the NASA channel, so I tend to keep up with things there.
Right.
So we'll just keep a lookout. So the window, I understand, is from July 30th for about a month. Is that right?
About a half a month, but they're trying to extend that.
Okay. And if you haven't looked, you can go to JPL and NASA, and you can see some really wonderful pictures of them preparing the vehicle and encasing it in its capsule and all that. That's really fun to watch and get the information. So we support all of you at JPL. Thank you for your great work as usual. You're the Patriots I think of when I think about Patriots. There it is. Okay, my friends.
Hey, Dawn.
Yes.
Do you want to troubleshoot your mic now, and I'll hang
No, let me tweak it here. I've got a couple of ideas, but we'll get it going. But thanks for the offer.
I think it's probably an electronic problem. Look at volume levels all the way through the system.
Okay.
I am having the same issue. It sounds like digital popcorn, right? That's
right.
What I'm talking about. I think I'm troubleshooting some of that myself. I actually think usually it's solved by a restart, but I think it's because there are competing audio. Are you running through an interface right now?
Yes.
I think it's because it's sending that signal to more than one place and the processor gets overloaded.
Okay. Well, I have a Focusrite, which is kind of a state-of-the-art processor here.
I'm working on whether that's an upgraded interface issue or an upgraded processor issue.
Gotcha.
I literally ordered a $3,500 computer today to see which one it is.
Okay, well, there that is. Well, I won't be doing that, but we'll do our best. Good to see you all. I love you. Bye.
Good to see you too.
Well, good seeing you, Don.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.